Let's explore G-code a little further in Bambu Studio. I'm going to start by creating a very simple model. I'll create a cube. And the first thing I'm going to look at is the coordinate system used by the printer. You can see in the lower left-hand corner of the print bed that the origin point is located there on the front left-hand side. The blue arrow going up and down is the z-axis, the green arrow going front to back is the y-axis, and the red arrow going from side to side is the x-axis. Click on the model, and I'll click Move and look at the world coordinates. You can see that the current position of the model is centered around x equals 90 millimeters, y equals 90 millimeters, and z equals 9 millimeters. So each of these squares is 10 millimeters, 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, 70, 80, 90 across in the x-axis and 90 back on the y-axis. And the z-coordinate is 9, which is odd because if I look at the size of the cube, it's 18 by 18 by 18. So let's see what happens if I change the z-coordinate to 0. It drops down. So you can see the cube is indeed centered. The center of the model is located at these coordinates. So if I change z to 0, it drops below the print bed. So that's why we want half of 18, which is 9, so that the cube will rest on the print bed. Let me go back to default view, and just for completeness sake, I'll change x to 0, y to 0, and z to 0, and you'll see that the cube is centered around that front left point. I'll zoom in, click off the cube, click on it, right click, and choose center to move it back to the center, but it's still halfway below the print bed, so I'll change z back to 9 to bring it up and center it. Okay, now to simplify the G-code that we're going to examine, I'm going to make some changes to this model. I note that the layer height is 0.2 and the initial layer height is also 0.2, so I want this cube to only be 2 layers tall. So I'll go to Scale and uncheck Uniform Scaling, and I'm going to change the height to 0.4, so that's 2 layers tall. And to make the coordinates a bit easier to see, I'm going to change the x and y size of the cube to 10 millimeters. And I'll also move it over here so that we can see what it looks like. Actually, I'll change the world coordinates to 15 and 15 and 0.2 so that it's resting on the print bed and not halfway below. Now, I'm also going to make some changes to the strength. I'm going to just have a single wall, and I don't want any bottom or top solid layers, and I don't want any infill, so I'll change all of those to 0. Now I'll click Print Preview and close these pop-ups, zoom in, and I'm going to use the slider on the right to go down. You can see there's only 2 layers there, and I'm going to use the bottom slider to go all the way to the front, or actually not all the way. I'm going to go sliding over until I start to see the first layer of filament. You can see there's a lot of code before the printer actually starts printing, and you'll notice when you start printing models on the A1 Mini that the printer goes through lots of convolutions before it starts printing the actual model. So we see this first line of code. It moved from here in line 851, x almost 20 and y almost 20, right? So if we go over 1020 and 1020, this is where it started. And now on line 860, it's moving to x10 and y20. So x10 is over this way and y20 is here. And we'll see that the next line of code moves to x10, y10, and then x20, y10, and then finally it will move to x20, y20 and complete that square. Now the reason it's not exactly 20 and 10 is because the slicer is taking into account the thickness of the line. We'll also notice at line 854 that the Z height here is 0.2, so this is the first layer. I'll click on the right-hand slider, tap the up arrow key on my keyboard, and then the down arrow key to get the second layer. Now I'll move the bottom slider back over until I see the first line appearing. And we can see that it started at X20, Y20. That's on line 926. And then it moved over to X10, Y20. And we can also see up here on line 927 that the Z height is 4. So the nozzle went up 0.2, right, from 0.2 to 0.4, and then over, and then forward, over to the right, and then back. So essentially, G-code is just a series of X, Y, and Z coordinates that tell the tool head, in this case the nozzle, where to move. It's a simple text file that can be read by a text editor. So let's take a look at that. I will choose File, Export as G-code, Cube PLA, 5 minutes and 50 seconds. It's on my desktop, so I'll click Save. Now I'll open a text editor. Text edit in this case, and I will find the file that I just downloaded right here, Cube PLA, 5 minutes, 50 seconds, open, and I'll make the text bigger so you can see it. There's lots of code gobbledygook in the front, and this is controlling the movement of the print head and the motions and actions of the printer before it starts actually printing your model. Any line that begins with a semicolon is just a comment. So these are not actually actionable items, they're just comments. But if we scroll down and keep scrolling, here we are finally at the model that's being printed. You can see Z is at 0.2 millimeters, and here are the 4 X and Y coordinates for the first layer. And then here's the second layer. Z is at 0.4 millimeters, and the 4 coordinates for the 4 sides of the model on the X and Y plane. If you're interested in learning more about G-code, there's a link in the Class Brightspace page for the Marlin website, which has all of the G-codes listed. Just understand that there may be slight differences between this open source version of G-code and the G-code that's actually generated by Bambu Studio.